There we go.
Okay, is everything good? Let
We
me
are
get
all set. Yep, thank you.
into presentation mode. Okay, so when I'm in presentation mode, I'm not going to be able to see you guys just because I guess it takes up both of my screens. So if you have one of those pressing questions or whatever, just unmute yourself and I'll try to
And
catch you.
I will try to monitor the chat, and if anything
Okay.
urgent
Yeah.
comes up, I will weigh in and let you know.
All right, that sounds good. All right, so hi everyone, thanks for coming. Like Matthew said, I'm Bianca Neale. I'm a current PhD student in the Center for Functional Anatomy and Evolution at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And my research focuses on squamates, particularly their masticatory system, and that just means their mouth. So what they're using to sort of get food into their body. And how they are going to process that. And so today I want to talk about the evolution of the jaw system and then go over how it looks in modern day squamates. So yeah, there's just a little bit of outline. We'll go through the origin of jaws, an introduction to jawed vertebrates who are commonly called gnathostomes, and then how jaws have changed as vertebrates made their way onto land. And so before jaws, we were just kind of these jawless armored fish, swimming around in the ocean. And at this point, so this is kind of the early Ordovician, so 480 million years ago, and there were no terrestrial vertebrates. So all vertebrate life is currently constrained to the ocean. And we're just these jawless fish, like I said, swimming around. So this is an artistic representation of what one of these fish would have looked like. So specifically, this is Erendaspis, which was one of the first fossil that we have of a jawless fish. And they're pretty popular, not only because they were one of the first fossils found, but also because of how weird they look. So this is like a 3D reconstruction. They have kind of this perpetually open mouth with these weird forward-facing eyes, and everyone just thinks that they're kind of silly looking. But their skeletons would have resembled this representation that I have here. So they would have had a skull that protected their brain and their sensory organs, like their eyes. And they distinctly lack a lower jaw. Instead, we have a series of bony lateral supports that go down sort of in their throat area. And these are called the pharyngeal arches, or labeled here, they're called the gill support bars. And these guys are commonly referred to as agnathons, agnathan meaning no mouth or no jaw. And so in early vertebrates that are lacking jaws, these bones, the pharyngeal arches that are supporting the gills, aid in gas exchange. So the main source of oxygenated water for things that are swimming around in the ocean comes through the mouth, passes through the gills, and then comes out of these pharyngeal slits. And that places the pharyngeal arches sort of in this convenient spot. Sorry, my cat is now freaking out in the background. In this convenient spot where they're suspended underneath the skull. And we do have modern representations of agnathons. Unfortunately, Erendaspis, or the armored jawless fish, did not survive into the modern because they did go extinct. However, we do have these two groups. So we have our lamprey, which is this guy, and then hagfish. And these guys together make up a group that we call cyclostomes, and that means circle or round mouth. And I'll leave you guys to sort of figure out where that name came from. There's a hint right there. And we can notice that they do have those pharyngeal slits as well. And those are the structures that are going to be supported by those pharyngeal arches. And so if we make a tree that sort of represents the evolutionary track that gave rise to jawed vertebrates, we would see that the closest branch to us is going to be these agnathons, or these jawless fish. Okay, so now that we kind of know our humble origins in the sea of the Ordovician, having no jaws, we can sort of progress to one of, if not the most significant change that occurs in early vertebrate taxa, and that is the evolution of jaws. And we know that jaws evolved sometime in around 430 million years ago, because there's two fossil taxa that we find in the fossil record. And those are two types of fish, our acanthodians, this spiny looking guy here, and our placoderms. So these are guys that are recorded from the early Silurian, which again is 430 million years ago. And they have true jaws. So they have an upper and a lower jaw that are connected to their cranium that they're able to open and close. And then in addition to these jaws, they also have paired pectoral and pelvic fins. So the pectoral fins are kind of where our arms would be. It's these guys right here. And then the pelvic fins, kind of think of them as their legs. They're right there. And then they're paired, so they have one on either side. And that is important for when we have this sort of fish to land vertebrate transition. And so the jaw anatomy here is still kind of primitive. So they are true jaws, but they're not as robust as they are today. But we do see that they are, again, suspended from the cranium here, which is still housing the brain and those special sensory organs. And these jaws that we have now are going to be derived from those pharyngeal arches that were supporting the gills that we saw in the jawless fish. We still have some pharyngeal arches in jawed vertebrates today, but the anterior-most ones, the forward-most ones, came and made up the first set of jaws. And so actually what we distinctly lack in these early jawed vertebrates is teeth. And so in these placoderms, like Dunkleosteus here, even though you see sort of representations of them with teeth, they aren't true teeth, and they're actually just these bony projections from their jaw bones. And unfortunately, we have no modern correlates for acanthodians or placoderms because they went extinct as well. But we can add them to our little tree that we're working on here. So here we see the origin of jaws, the placoderms and the acanthodians come off here. And then we share a common ancestor with these guys. And so the next group I'm going to talk about is the modern jawed vertebrates, or crown Gnathostomata. And so modern jawed vertebrates can be divided into sort of two main groups. We have our cartilaginous fish, and that includes our sharks, our rays, and this thing called a ratfish or a chimera. And we also have our osteichthyes, our bony fish. And I use these terms cartilaginous and bony to refer to their skeleton. So cartilaginous fish have a skeleton that's completely made out of cartilage. The only thing that they have that's mineralized is their teeth, while bony fish have a completely mineralized skeleton. And it's kind of because of this, we don't really see shark skeletons or anything in the fossil record, but we do have an abundance of their teeth. And that's because the teeth are really the only thing that are making it through that fossilization process. And so modern gnathostone jaw anatomy, we can see, is more robustly built. So we have the addition of more pharyngeal arches coming forward and making their way into the jaw apparatus. And we also have the addition of these true teeth here, setting them apart from sort of early jawed vertebrates. And so here, we can see an example of a shark skull, specifically a spiny dogfish. We can see the cranium here, which again is housing the brain and those special sensory organs, like the eyes. Its nose would be up here. And then it would also have vestibulocochlear system, which helps with balance and orientation in the water. And then suspended from that cranium, we have our true jaws. So there's our upper jaw and our lower jaw, and we can see that these are possessing true teeth. This is also observable in the bony fish. So this is a knife fish skull. Again, we have the cranium, upper and lower jaws possessing true teeth. And this is sort of a really big advantage to jawed vertebrates, because now they're able to sort of capture and possess foods in ways that hasn't really been done before. And so now we can complete this phylogeny by adding our existing terminal taxa, so those cartilaginous fish and those bony fish. And we have found representations of these guys in the fossil record, but to be considered a crown group, you have to be bounded by existing representations of your group. So this is just what the tip is going to look like right now. I've just added modern, existing, currently living animals. And I bet it did not escape anyone's notice that I'm calling this group here the bony fish, even though I've included a dove, a cobra, and a giraffe. And I'm not doing that because I'm just trying to be silly. I'm doing that for a good reason. So without getting too much into the terminology, land vertebrates, so mammals, reptiles, and amphibians, we all evolved from a common ancestor that was actually a bony fish. And for any group to be valid, it has to include the common ancestor and all of its descendants. And so since we are descendants of bony fish, we thus have to be called bony fish. But this transition from sort of us being fish to truly being on land, we can also see reflected in the fossil record. So it all started with a group of fish called the Sarcopterygians, or the lobe-fin fishes, represented here by this guy called Eusthenopteron. This is a fish from the Devonian period, about 385 million years ago. And it's widely accepted to be a stem tetrapod. And so derived from this fish and sort of its other ancestors or descendants, we get this guy popping up. So this is actually Tiktaalik, which is a pretty famous known fossil. It was one of the first fishopods to ever be discovered. And it's called a fishopod because it has a mixture, almost a 50-50 mixture of fish-like traits and tetrapod-like traits. And so this was a fish that was kind of adapting or starting to adapt for life out of the water. And that led to us crawling onto land, which I've depicted here with a salamander, where you can see its nice, well, 3 of the 4 limbs that it possesses. But I've been saying tetrapod and I haven't really defined it. So a tetrapod, quite literally, the name means 4-footed. And it's vertebrates that are characterized by having muscular limbs that end in defined joints and digits. And so today, our tetrapods, again, are those amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. And even though some may have lost having a set of limbs or all 4 limbs, like snakes, for example, they're still considered tetrapods because they evolved from an ancestor that had all 4 limbs. And so to sort of go back to my phylogeny that I seem to be obsessed with, here we can see our context of our modern day tetrapods. And additionally, if we go back, so there's tetrapod node right here. We get to the Sarcopterygian node, which I mentioned earlier with Eusthenopteron, and the living sort of fish that we share a descendant with are the coelacanth and the lungfish. All right, so let's get into how the tetrapod jaw is structured. So the jaw joint is typically made of a synovial joint, and that means it's a highly mobile joint that has a capsule with synovial fluid that is reducing the friction that the bones experience when they move against one another. And here we can see this in this sort of section of a lizard jaw. So this is a histological section, so it's been stained using dyes so that we can see certain tissues. But here we can see 2 bones coming together. And it's these guys in dark purple. It has this cavity or this cavity in the middle here, which is where the synovial fluid would be, and then this capsule around it, and that would be the synovial capsule. And these are all characteristics of a mobile synovial joint. And to sort of drive the point home, these are some examples of synovial joints that we have in our body as well. And so that you can just move these guys around and see how mobile they are. That's exactly what our jaw joints are, and all the tetrapod jaw joints are. So this highly mobile joint, akin to the earlier iterations of jaws, is still suspended from the cranium. And movements at this joint are responsible for food acquisition, whether it's munching it off of the ground like grass or trying to actively capture it like a predator. And feeding grants the organism the ability to acquire and break down their food, which really allowed them to sort of diversify into a lot of different niches. And with that, the jaw joint has been adapted to fit into those ways that tetrapods feed and behave as well. So here I have a bunch of skulls representing the diverse morphology that we can see in current terrestrial jawed vertebrates. So here's a flamingo, has a small little jaw joint back here. Here's a rattlesnake. You can see how large that jaw joint is. This is a type of bat called a flying fox. It has a very characteristic mammal jaw joint. And then this is a frog with its tiny little jaw joint back there. And so getting into the different types of jaw suspension, this is what is sort of mirroring the ways that tetrapods have diversified. There's this one way of jaw suspension where the jaw is suspended from the cranium via the quadrate bone, which is what I've highlighted in red here, and that is called metautostyle. And we can sort of see in this figure how we progress from jawless agnathans to sort of early gnathostomes. And then there's this divergence here. So this is where the fish are going, but let's pay attention to the tetrapods here. We move into this metautostylic state. And so this is going to allow for various degrees of cranial kinesis, just because instead of having this single joint here like mammals do, they actually have two joints. And so mammal skulls, if we sort of keep evolving, actually get kind of boring. They just have one sort of jawbone that connects to the skull at one point. And this is actually important for the strength of the mammal masticatory system. So this craniostyle allows for the up and down and sort of side to side motion for chewing and mastication, but doesn't really allow for the same range of movement that we saw in those metautostylic skulls. But we're not here to talk about mammals, so let's get back to squamates, our lizards and snakes. So what is really interesting about the terrestrial vertebrates or the terrestrial gnathostomes that we have right now is that they have varying degrees of cranial kinesis. So since squamate jaws aren't nearly as boring as mammal jaws are, they're going to be capable of these additional movements in their skull. So here at the top, there are three joints. These are all joints that are happening in addition to the jaw joint at the roof of the skull. So we can see that there is some movement here called metakinesis, which is movement between the neurocranium and the dermatocranium. And the neurocranium is the part of your skull that houses your brain, while the dermatocranium is kind of the base skull part. There's also mesokinesis. So this is a joint in the skull that is behind the eyes that sort of allows this anterior or forward part to pivot up and down. And then there's also prokinesis, and that is a joint in front of the eye that allows the snout to pivot up and down. And usually we have this kind of cranial kinesis paired with streptostyle, and streptostyle is the movement of the quadrate at this topmost joint here where it's articulating with the cranium. And streptostyle is seen in all squamates. And so if we observe how squamates eat and how they behave when they're eating, we can see how that reflects their cranial morphology. So this is an iguana skull here. I have their quadrate outlined in red. So that is the bony element that is suspending the lower jaw from the skull. And then in blue, I have that joint. It's called the otic joint, but that is where the streptostyle, so the movement of the quadrate along the cranium is going to occur. And we can see that, you know, it's just kind of chomping down here. There's not really any movement. So this is about as akinetic as a squamate skull can get. So it's really sort of fused together up here. I don't have a front view of it, but its lower jaw down here is going to be fused together like ours as well. And we can just see it sort of munching just like a mammal would. And since they eat often invertebrates and plants, they don't really need to open their jaws super wide or super fast. And then sort of taking that to the next level, we have lizards like varanids. In this case, I've brought back the Komodo dragon. But we can see here they have a joint behind their eye. So that is going to be our mesokinesis or a mesokinetic joint, in addition to that streptostylic joint. And this is going to allow them to widen their gape and have a really flexible skull. But we do notice here that we still have this fusion in the mandible in the front. And sort of an example of how they're using this to their advantage is this little video I have here of a Komodo dragon swallowing its prey whole. So this is a baby goat. Often, if the prey is small enough, they will swallow it whole. And so getting into the vertebrates who have really taken craniokinesis to the next level are snakes. And snakes exhibit probably the most degree of craniokinesis in any vertebrate ever. And basically none of their skull bones are attached to each other or fused to each other. So that allows articulation at pretty much, or movement at every joint. So if I were to highlight the cranial joints like I did for this Komodo dragon, we probably wouldn't be able to see the snake skull anymore. But snakes use these extreme sort of movements in their skull to not only open their mouths super wide, as we can see in this image here and in this video where it's swallowing an alligator, but they also use sort of independent movements of their jawbones to drag their prey down their throat. So here we can see an X-ray, and we can see this unilateral movement. If it goes back to the beginning, yeah, there we go. So we can see it sort of walking its mandibles forward, and that is allowing it to sort of forcefully pull that prey down its throat. And then once it gets into its throat, it can use its pharyngeal muscles to then swallow it down and take it into the rest of their body. So to keep talking about snakes, because they're obviously one of my favorite critters, this is an egg-eating snake who is also taking craniokinesis to sort of the extreme. And so the only limit on this snake is pretty much how much it can stretch its soft tissues. So you can see here how taut the skin has gotten just because of how large the egg that it's swallowing is. And they do something really weird. So in case you were wondering how they digest the eggshell, the answer is they don't. They actually have a process on the ventral side, so the belly side of their vertebrae, that they press against the egg once they swallow it to crack it, and they regurgitate the shell back up. And then I also wanted to get into our venomous snakes. So this is an example of a venomous snake here, a gaboon viper. Because they have their fangs on these small little maxillary bones that are also capable of really wide ranges of movement. And I've used a gaboon viper here because they have the largest fangs in probably the animal kingdom. And so it's easy to see when they swing them out. So I have this video of one yawning. Yep. And you can see just how wide it's opening that jaw and how much mobility it has with those fangs. And this is all due to how many joints they have in their jaw joint, as well as all the joints that they have in their cranium. And so that sort of allows snakes to live this sort of very relaxed lifestyle, if you will, as an ambush predator, especially for venomous snakes like the gaboon viper, because all they really have to do is lie in wait till a little prey item comes running by them. They strike it to inject it with venom, and then they wait for the venom to take effect, where they can basically just swallow their prey with little to no resistance. All right, so I guess that's the end. I kind of ran through that. But thank you guys for listening and coming, and I'll take any questions.
That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you addressed this, but as I was watching the snake try to swallow the egg, it was fascinating to me that the egg doesn't break. Are they able to like control the amount of pressure that they apply somehow while they're swallowing this?
Yeah. So since their skulls are so kinetic and so able to move, they can't really apply much force. So really what they're doing is they're pushing the egg against the ground and then just trying to open up their skulls as much as possible and kind of just like sucking the egg in. So they're not really applying much force because they can't. They have sort of really weak jaw muscles just because of the need of them to stretch. And so the egg doesn't crack because they're not sort of applying that much pressure.
Right on. What other questions do you all have? Check
Why
in the chat.
does the gaboon viper look like it has 4 fangs on the skeleton picture?
So it does have 4 fangs. It has these medial ones, which are pretty large, and then some lateral ones here. And that's just because it wants to pump a lot of venom into its prey because it wants its prey to be completely paralyzed before it swallows it. And I actually have my representation here. It's kind of large. Oh, you might not be able to see it.
Whoa.
But yeah, if this is the maxilla right here, we can see it has one pretty large fang running on the side.
Do you want to stop sharing for a minute, Bianca? Then maybe we
Oh,
can see what you're showing us.
yeah. Okay. And have I gotten larger here?
Yes.
Yeah, so here you go. So you can see, yeah, they do have 4 fangs, 2 on each side.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then they actually kind of act like a straw. So there is an opening sort of right here where they have this tube that sort of is running from their venom glands that are back in their cheeks. And that allows for venom to sort of run down the fang. And when they bite something, allows it to be injected like a needle.
Oh, I thought it was at the tips of the fangs.
Yeah, but in the soft tissue, to get the venom to the fangs, there's this opening at the top as well. Okay, I see a question in the chat that says, how do snakes breathe when they are downing prey? And yes, that is a good question. Let me see if we're able to see it in any of the videos I have. I don't think so. Okay. But the internal anatomy of snakes is kind of not very symmetrical. So they have one lung, which is their main lung, and then another lung that is positioned behind it, which is kind of like their reserve lung. So when they're swallowing stuff down, they actually extend their trachea outside of their mouth so that they're able to still take in air as they're swallowing really large prey. And then when the prey sort of gets in their throat, and it's compressing their main lung, they will breathe with that reserve lung that's further down their body.
Is that, I suppose that's true of constrictors as well, and I never really thought
Yes.
about that.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Snakes are so fascinating.
They're crazy.
Do we have any evidence of animals that are sort of on the way to being snakes in terms of like the flexibility of the kinesis of the jaw, as it were?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the first features that snakes evolved. So we do have some fragmentary fossils that suggest that there was a slendered body lizard with a superkinetic skull that was running around. But snakes, since their bones are so delicate, don't also preserve that well. Kind of like how sharks and their cartilage didn't preserve that well too. So it's really hard to sort of find a fossil that has all the traits that we associate with snakes to be able to say, oh, this is a stem snake or this is the ancestor to all snakes. And there's actually kind of a debate in the community right now whether snakes evolved from a fossorial, so something that was digging and living underground, or an aquatic origin, so something that was swimming in a body of water like an ocean.
Mm-hmm. And did they have to develop these flexible jaws before they could lose their legs? Is there like an evolutionary advantage to losing the legs? I know that's not really the scope of the talk, but are
Um,
legs expensive in some way and it's easier to not have them? I've always been
so
curious
I
about that.
think the reason for the leg loss is kind of explained depending on how you think snakes originated. So if you think of the fossorial origins, you would think they didn't need their legs anymore because they were just using their sort of bodies to sort of live in crevices and be, compact to sort of fit in there. If you want to go with the aquatic hypothesis, you think they got rid of their legs because they were swimming via lateral undulation. So they were just kind of paddling their bodies. And then also, like, they could have lost their legs because they turned to constricting. So they wanted to be able to wrap their entire bodies around prey. There's a lot of hypotheses out there because the timing on whether the skull, a completely kinetic skull, evolved first or limb loss was first, there's not really fossils that line up for us to be able to exactly tell when those transitions occurred.
So there's no clear connection that can be drawn there. Got it. Here's a question in the chat that do we know what oldest genetic snake species is that's still present today?
Yeah, so a lot of genome data about squamates has come out recently, and traditionally based on morphological data, that was how we used to categorize animals. And there are these types of snakes called blind worm snakes. And they were considered to be the most primitive snakes for a long time. They kind of just look like worms. They have really tiny eyes. Their jaws aren't really that well developed because they eat insects, like worms and stuff that live underground. And people, because they were like so primitive in their morphology, thought they were representative of early snakes. And then actually we got the genome data back, and it turns out that based off of the genetics, constrictors like boa constrictors or pythons are actually the earliest sort of clade of snakes that occur.
Good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Jackie, you have lots of which one? Worm snakes? I think they meant they have lots of worm snakes on their property. Neat. Awesome. Thank you, Bianca. Other questions, folks? Thank you for joining us. I hope you learned something. I know I did. That was really cool. And I hope that, any way we can encourage people to have a sense of respect and awe around snakes is good in my book. Thank you so much. And happy World Lizard Day to everyone. The other squamate, the less popular squamate. Lizards are cool too. The squamates with legs, the walking squamates. That was super interesting. So last call for questions, anyone? I appreciate you all. Bianca, thank you so much for joining us. I think the questions have ended. So that's it for now. We'll see you next time, everyone. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks, guys.